Hello, everybody, to this week's lecture of Slut 7829, Text Analysis in Corpus Linguistics. So what you're about to see is a lecture by Dr. Peter Crossthwaite, who is senior lecturer in our school and who is one of the world-leading specialists on DDL, data-driven learning. And he'll give a talk about using Corpora for language learning and teaching in the context of DDL. So I hope you enjoy the rest of the lecture, and yeah, see you soon in the tutorials.
So let's get into it today, and you can see here on this image, which came out from a bibliometric review in the field of corpus linguistics that I and Martin Schweinberger and a colleague published last year, all of the different things here that people are doing with Corpora, whether that's looking at spoken discourse, whether that's metaphor, whether that's discourse analysis, and the kind of work that Monica is well known for. But in particular, I'd like to draw your attention to the little blue bubble over here, marked DDL, which is data-driven learning, or the direct use of language corpora for language teaching and learning. And corpora have been widely used in education for decades now, whether you know it or not. If you've ever taken the IELTS test or done IELTS materials, for example, maybe you know this book here, the Mindset series, which is, I was one of the authors of this series. IELTS corpora and learner corpora have been used for a long time to help generate language tests, syllabi, materials, and then for language research, of course. But what we're going to be talking about today is this intersection between corpora, teachers, and learners, with that term there, data-driven learning, which was a term coined as far back as the early 90s by a professor called Tim Johns, who was one of the first to use corpora for this purpose. So in terms of what data-driven learning is, it's classed as the direct, hands-on use of corpus linguistics in education. And I've got a couple of slides coming up that help to explain that a little bit further. But essentially, it's about combining typical corpus linguistic techniques like concordancing, keyword analysis, frequency list generation, collocates, and so on, and combining these this kind of information and these kind of corpus skills with teaching, with pedagogy, and with language learning. From a theoretical point of view, you can see here on the image, essentially works in two main ways. At the individual level, students' corpus consultation is a kind of discovery learning following constructivist, usage-based learning principles. And by this, we mean that under usage-based accounts of second language acquisition, for example, frequency and salience and constructions and multi-word units and chunks and all of these things are highly important for language learning. And the idea is that what corpora do very well is to make some of this frequency information more salient. It provides evidence of important factors like what words go together with other words, what words don't go together, so that then you are inductively acquiring all of this information from the data that you're being exposed to. This is called focus on form for those of you who've taken courses in SLA previously. From a classroom perspective, when students are consulting corpora together with the assistance of their peers or maybe with their teacher, this brings into account more socio-cultural, socio-constructivist forms of learning with teachers and peers mediating the corpus data, talking about what they're finding, reflecting upon what they're finding, and so on. And all of these things are helping people talk about language, they're analyzing language to learn about language. DDL has been used for a wide range of different learning targets. For example, first language acquisition, second language acquisition, understanding general and specific disciplinary genres, understanding different registers, and disciplinary discourses, for example, a lot of the work that I was doing in Hong Kong. So that's a little bit about what it is. You can see here in this image some of the different ideas in terms of how DDL might help you acquire vocabulary at the individual level by consulting concordance lines from corpora, analyzing, synthesizing these results. This leads to higher order thinking when conducted with teachers and in classroom settings, with teacher-guided activities. We've got increased engagement in solving problems, together with the scaffolding of inquiries, with instructor support, and all of these things together, so the theory supposes, are meant to be beneficial for second language acquisition. And the results, the evidence of learning gains has been now widely recognized in the kind of 2 decades or so of research with 4 data-driven learning studies that are now widely reported in meta-analyses and bibliometric analyses within the last few years. So how does it work exactly? At the very basic level, learners' interaction with concordance data as provided through corpora, learners will read concordances, they'll be able to understand how words are used in context, they'll be able to manipulate those concordances and sort and rearrange them to find different pathways into the targets that they're querying, and that's kind of the more traditional method. As the corpus tools have increased in functionality, we now have the ability to generate frequency lists, to understand collocation information at both the statistical and increasingly visual levels, as you might get here in the bottom left, where the user's searching for all verbs that will come before the term death penalty. You can then see here some visual cues as to the potential likelihood of a given verb filling that slot, and then you'll be able to make an informed decision about which one may be the verb that you're supposed to use. Some more even advanced tools are putting together visual kind of information. This one here is taken from the tool called Voyant Tools, which is a freely available kind of self-built corpus viewer, data analyzer. So for people who maybe don't like reading concordances, or maybe who find reading concordances too difficult, maybe there are lower proficiencies, for example, this could be an alternative way into the data. So it's gone beyond simple concordancing. Modern corpus tools have a lot of different powerful functions, and data-driven learning researchers like myself are working hard to make sure that different learners are exposed to as many different kinds of data as possible, so that they can gain as many insights into that data that they can for the purposes of teaching and learning. So I mentioned before about direct DDL. There are 2 kinds of DDL in the literature. Firstly, the indirect DDL, which is use of corpora to generate teaching materials, exercises, maybe the sequencing of curricula and so on. And then these will find their way into textbooks. And most modern publishers, like the big publishers like Cambridge University Press, Oxford, Macmillan, Pearson, they have corpus linguists who work in the offices. They're there getting the information about language at, say, different proficiency levels, different registers, different disciplines, and they're putting together exercises and grammar tasks and vocabulary learning tasks and many more, and putting these into established textbooks so that for publication, for sale around the world. So you may have already been using corpus-based teaching materials for some time without maybe necessarily realizing that you've done so. The direct form, though, the one that we're really here to talk about today, is learners using some kind of computer or mobile device to consult a corpus or corpora with a particular corpus tool or tools for the purposes of teaching and learning, whether that's at the individual level, or here, as you can see in the image, maybe in a classroom, working together to solve language-related tasks and problems. So an example of a hands-on DDL activity may be to go to a popular corpus platform, For example, here, Corpus Mate, which I'll introduce to you later in the talk. This is a tool that's recently been released by myself and Dr. Vit Weiser, who's also created a number of other popular Corpus tools that you might already know, like Skell, and he's worked on the Sketch Engine platform. Using this tool, you might then go and search for particular nouns and then the prepositions that follow them. You will then look at the concordance lines or maybe take in some of the statistical information about these combinations and search this data to find the patterns of these prepositional patterns together with these nouns. So for example, here, blame, attention, delighted. And that would be an example of a hands-on DDL activity. To juxtapose that, a hands-off activity would be where the teacher, prior to the class taking place, would actually go into the corpus and pull out these concordances by themselves. These could then be copied and pasted onto a Word document, printed out as a handout for the students to then look at together in a classroom setting. This kinds of activity is usually used as a precursor to direct hands-on DDL for learners who are just starting to learn about how to do this kind of learning. Or also hands-off DDL is also used in situations where students do not have access to computers or mobile devices within the classroom context. This is pretty common in countries like Vietnam and Indonesia, where I do a lot of teacher training work, where the teachers are the only ones with the computer in that setting. And so they're the ones responsible for getting the teaching activities together. And then the students will still do data-driven learning, but without necessarily having access to the corpus on their own. So in terms of some of the questions you might have, we've divided these up into, I think, 3. And then we've kind of got an answer for how for each of these in the slides that follow. So one of the first questions is about the potential challenges of using corpora and DDL in the classroom. This includes finding appropriate corpora for consultation, in that the corpus should be suitable for the target language or register or genre that you're attempting to learn, understanding how to use corpus tools effectively, and then developing activities and exercises that are engaging and effective for students. Not only that, but you also need to do a little bit of training in the process of consulting corpora and analyzing concordances and understanding frequency information, understanding colloquial information, so that they know what that information tells us and how to learn about language using that information. In terms of my work, I mean, I've done a lot of DDL work at the university level, but the thing I'm probably more known for is trying to expand the scope of DDL studies beyond university education into primary and secondary classrooms. You can see here some of the main barriers to implementing DDL within these contexts. This might include a lack of pedagogic processing of existing adult-focused materials, as most corpus tools and corpus data are produced with adults in mind and therefore may be unsuitable for younger learners or learners sometimes in more conservative teaching and learning contexts like Indonesia, for example. We also mentioned there a lack of software. Many of the tools available are produced for adults and produced for language researchers or applied linguists rather than language learners and their teachers. There are now some software that's emerged over the last 5 years that have made great efforts to be more user-friendly, and as well as my own tool, CorpusMate, which I'll talk about in a moment. But a lot of research is still done with very complex tools like BYU or EnglishCorpora.org, with about 35% of DDL studies still using those very complex tools. And then, of course, teachers need training. Teachers need help in understanding what corpora are, what they can do, and how to use them. And this term has been called corpus literacy. And there's been a great number of recent studies within the last couple of years focusing on using corpora in language teacher education, language teacher training at the pre-service levels and at the in-service levels. I'm busy doing one of these right now with language teachers in Vietnam. There's been a lot of work in Hong Kong. There's been work in Europe, as well as my own work here in Australia. And what we find for computer-assisted language learning in general, and corpora in particular, is that teachers generally have pretty good technological knowledge. They have pretty good pedagogical knowledge. They have very good content knowledge, but it's this combination of being able to put together a lesson plan that combines content knowledge, pedagogical knowledge, and technological knowledge into this middle part here known as TPAC. And this is something that a lot of studies at the moment are trying to work out the best ways to promote this TPAC using corpora and DDL. So this is something that is quite popular, and I've seen a number of studies on this come out within the last few months, for example. So another question you might have is, how do you ensure that your students are using corpora and DDL effectively? One way is through tutorials and demonstrations and training. Another way is to monitor their progress and provide feedback on their use of corpora. In particular, trying to get them to do it in pairs and groups so as to facilitate that social cultural element to what it is that they're doing. And it makes it more fun for them as well to be able to talk about corpus data, to be able to talk about what they're looking at, what that data means to them, what they're getting out of that data. They can share ideas and strategies and so on. And then to think about whether the activities that you're doing with corpora are helping you to ensure that you're meeting your learning objectives. Some really useful ways to do this that have come out of the literature include the concepts of pattern hunting and pattern refining, which I'll talk about on the next few slides. And then the 4 I's of illustration, interaction, induction, and intervention, again, which I'll also talk about in a moment. What you can see here on the right is also with relation to second language writing studies, whereby you'll have students doing written work, teachers providing indirect feedback on that written work, and then students using corpora to revise their writing based on the written feedback that's provided. And I did a fair bit of research on what is the best kind of feedback to give to students that's going to allow corpus consultation to occur. By working on multiple drafts and using corpora as a tool to help revise errors and issues with readability and content, using corpora is a really effective way in the second language writing classroom. So that's something to think about there for those of you who are thinking of doing that. Pattern hunting as a concept involves students searching for patterns in the corpus. These patterns could be in the form of collocations, maybe fixed phrases, grammatical structures, and so on. And using corpus data, maybe frequency data or collocation information to help us understand that the thing that I'm looking for or the information that I'm looking at in the data is a frequent pattern in English, that it is commonly used in this discipline or that register or this register. For example, here, corpus analysis might reveal that the verb make is often used in collocation with the noun decision, i.e. make a decision. And then once students know that that is a pattern, they can then go ahead and search for instances of that pattern in corpus A or corpus B, and then explore that pattern in detail. And the hope is, but by querying that pattern and understanding how that pattern is used, they're then taking the necessary steps to acquire that pattern as a fixed construct. Pattern refining then is taking that original pattern and extending that context, maybe. So once we've identified the pattern, we can then refine it and change it and seek alternatives to that pattern and see how those work. For example, if the pattern "make a decision" has been identified as useful, the teacher might provide examples about how it is used in a certain context, and then provide exercises that allow students to practice using the pattern themselves. So once you've identified patterns, then playing around with the different situations of use, playing around with some of the different contexts or registers, playing around with the individual nouns or verbs in that construction is termed pattern refining. And basically, as long as you're doing one of these two or both, then you're getting students to really focus on form, meaningful look at language, and you're creating the conditions for language acquisition to occur. In terms then of the 4 I's I mentioned previously, we have here illustration, in which the teacher is presenting examples from corpus data. Maybe this could be done at the beginning of a lesson or as a pre-lesson activity. The goal of this step is to provide students with a clear understanding of how a given expression, for example, is used in a real-world situation. Following that, we get on to the interaction stage, maybe here. Following corpus consultation, we then take some of the patterns that we found, use these in communicative activities, whether that's speaking or writing, could be pair work, could be group work, whole class discussion, and so on, providing students with opportunities to practice using the target language in a supportive and interactive environment. Then we could go back to the corpus data, maybe that pattern refining stage. And we're here at stage 3, then induction. Students will analyze examples of language they've encountered in the previous steps. This might include identifying additional patterns, alternative collocations, alternative phrasal or grammatical structures, and then this is providing you with a deeper understanding of the things that you were looking for originally. And an optional final step would be that of intervention. Maybe here the teacher then is providing corrective feedback on oral production, on written production, helping students to reflect on their language use and helping them to develop accuracy and fluency in the use of the target language, whether that's with additional corpus evidence or not. So those are some practical ways that a teacher might be able to operationalize data-driven learning activities in the classroom. What examples do we have of how this can be done in, say, the context of a lesson plan? So some examples include maybe language teaching materials like vocabulary lists, listening and reading comprehension activities that use corpus data, writing prompts based on language corpus data, using DDL software to help students identify and analyze patterns, maybe in oral data, for example, or listening scripts, or from a reading passage that they've been given. Maybe we could run that data into a corpus tool and identify some of the most frequent vocabulary, constructions, and structures within that input text so that we can make some of those patterns more salient and more learnable and more teachable. So by way of example, something that I produced together with a team of researchers in Brazil at the State University of Sao Paulo was an open educational resource called Using Language Data to Learn About Language. This is a teacher's guide to classroom corpus use. And basically you can access this freely, available on the website Using Language Data, which I'm just going to put into the chat here for everybody. And what this book contains is a set of ready-made lesson plans that all contain at least one corpus-based activity in pursuit of the lesson goals. So by way of example, I'm going to take you through the second lesson in the book, So Many Things in a Day. The lesson is designed for high school learners, and it's aiming to help learners use colloquial expressions with the verbs be, get, have, put, and take in the context of daily or routine activities. Now, something that we do in this book, as I mentioned previously, was that for each lesson in this book, we've designed 2 alternatives to the lesson. One is the hands-on version, where the students are able to use Corpora themselves to complete the activities, and then the hands-off version where the students don't have access to the corpus, but maybe the teacher has access to the corpus, or we provide the concordances ourselves so that students can go ahead and complete the lesson. Each lesson comes with a YouTube video that guides learners through the technical process of querying the corpus, for those who respond better to video presentation rather than in text. Some information about the teacher who provided it. So let's go into the lesson. We've got an image here of each lesson plan that summarizes the lesson into a single handy image that can be printed out. The objectives are to use these verbs in daily activities or routine contexts. We have here the specific objectives. This includes using the SCEL Corpus platform to look for possible combinations with these target verbs, and then use that data to help write sentences that describe people's daily routines. Then, in terms of lesson development, each lesson takes a step-by-step guide from introduction, talking about the context of the lesson, the prior knowledge that may be required before we get into the corpus consultation, the actual development, the corpus research component of the lesson, including the amount of time that's going to take, the nature of the interaction, so that's going to be teacher to learners or learners to learners, application of the corpus data, and then some kind of closing reflection, discussion about what they found, and in some cases also an optional assessment component as well for teachers who may need that. We then get into the specific activities, including the pre-warm-up activities, like here in small groups, talk about your daily routine, answer the questions below. Another awareness-raising activity of the verbs that we're interested in here, be, get, have, put, and take. And then the actual corpus activity here, students have to go to the SCEL corpus, which should open up in another tab. This is here the SCEL platform. It's called the Sketch Engine for Language Learning platform, which is a really simple, very user-friendly corpus query platform based on the Sketch Engine software. Students are then looking for possible combinations involving the verbs be, get, have, put, and take using the word sketch function. So for example, if we put here get, I'm going to look at get examples of get. SCEL will give me 40 of these. So I've got here gets used, gotten too expensive, got immediate attention, getting worse, getting sloppy, and so on. Or I could use the word sketch function and look up some information about the subject of get, so nouns that come up as a subject of get. For example, things get, people get, kids get, players get. Or nouns that are the object of get a job, get the idea, get results, and so on. And these are all clickable, and I can then go ahead and find those sentences and results. And then the students will be inputting some of the information they found there into those functions. When that's all done, they will write sentences using those combinations that they found, and then they'll discuss the following questions with their classmates as a reflective activity. The hands-off version of the lesson does basically exactly the same thing, but this time, instead of getting the students to consult the corpus, we've given the students the concordances themselves, and they can use this information then to be able to complete the activities without necessarily having access to the corpus data or the access to the corpus platform on their own. So that's pretty much about how that works and how you might put together a sample DDL lesson. And again, do go ahead and check out the book anytime. There are 16 useful lessons that you can modify for your own context. In terms of the next question then, questions you might have, how can I assess my students' progress in using Corpora and DDL? This can be done experimentally, can be done in the form of assessments. We can introduce questions related to corpus consultation or data-driven learning on your students' assessments or exams in order to test your students' understanding of these tools and of the language that it is that they're going to be querying. So one example of what kind of experimental study that I did over the last couple of years was work published in Computer-Assisted Language Learning last year with secondary age students at an all-girls school here in Queensland. And I did kind of data-driven learning workshop for all staff at the school, in the hope that somebody would want to work with me and to do some experimenting. And I was contacted by the teachers of the English as an additional language and dialect, as well as the physical science teachers, who noticed that their students, when writing research reports, which is one of the things that they have to do for their high school examinations in year 12, they write research reports without necessarily understanding the use of the passive voice very well. And these are largely monolingual English-speaking students, and they're still not really able to understand the context of when they might use the passive voice and also how to put it together properly, frequently making errors when doing so. So they thought using Corpora might be a really good way to help raise students' awareness about the passive voice construction in science report writing. So how did it work? What did we do? The students were writing research reports about science experiments that they were observing in class. This included the effect of static electric charge against deflection, which you can see here in the image in the top right, whereby the students they get like a metal pole. They have to rub it with a cloth. This generates static electricity on the pole. They then turn on the tap and the water will deflect around the static electricity. And then once they've observed that experiment and taken notes, they then have to write that up as a research report. They also had to do this for 2 other experiments, including wire resistivity and concentration of substances. So more on the chemical side of things there. Based on their early drafts of these research reports, I built a learner corpus based on this and looked at the kind of passive voice constructions that they were having trouble with. And the most frequently used verbs in passive voice included is and was, obviously, and were, but also rubbed, rubbing, applied, moved, measured, and charged. So on the basis of these targets, then, I put together as additional activities on my course, Improving Writing through Corpora, which I believe that many of you are now doing as part of your assessment for this course. You're doing the activities designed for the university students. But what you'll see at the bottom of that are the activities that I designed for the training for these secondary school students. So it's here the Ipswich Girls Physical Science Corpus activities. And you can see here some of the online materials that students did in class together with their teachers that would take them through some the use of pretty straightforward corpus tools and try to get them to learn about these verbs in passive voice construction. So for example, here, this activity is using the lingual platform, using the or operator, which is operationalized by a / here. This then tells you which word either side of the slash is the more frequent in the corpus. So for example, here, is it was charged is more frequent, or is it more was electrified is the more frequent. Entering this search into lingual will give you the following results. And then you can make a reasonable assumption about which word is the one I'm supposed to be using here. And then we give them another activity using a different set of verbs. They go into the corpus and then they answer the multiple choice questions here. There were 5 modules that took them through the basic functions of these different corpus tools. And upon completing all of this training in class, we then attempted to assess whether they improved in their knowledge and use of the passive voice as a result of this corpus consultation. So what did we find? we found that at the receptive levels, we gave them 2 experimental procedures. One was a grammaticality judgment task sourced from the IRIS repository. So they would get sentences, for example, here, rice has been grown for thousands of years. They have to label whether this expression is correct, incorrect, or not sure. And then we gave them this test at the beginning of the training and immediately following completion of the 5 modules of training as well. Now, at the receptive levels, you have to remember that these are mainly monolingual speakers of English. So they already know and understand the passive voice construction, which is why we did not get a significant difference in the test scores between the pre-test and the post-test. But we didn't really expect to, because we knew that they would already have quite good knowledge of the passive voice construction. However, something we did do for the post-test was that we said, if you want to use a Corpus platform to check your answer, then you can. And students would select yes or no about whether they use the Corpus tool to check their answer. And we found that they actually did so quite frequently. They used Corpus as a collective 168 times from a group of about 40 students. And we also noted that when they did use the Corpus, 87.5% of answers that were associated with Corpus use resulted in a correct answer. That's something that we were quite positive about. So even though the difference was not significant in terms of the pre and post-test scores, students were freely using Corpus and doing so fairly accurately. The second task we gave them was an error correction task. We got a sentence with an error in it. Students have to rewrite the sentence correcting the error. Again, this is a receptive task, so they didn't really do any better pre or post-test. But again, that when they were given the opportunity to use a Corpus, they did so fairly frequently, and most of the time they did so accurately as well. Quite surprising was in the productive task, where you can see here they have to follow a picture sequence of putting these verbs in passive voice. For example, here the package was taken to the post office, the package was weighed on the scales, the package was stamped, and so on. We found that girls did significantly better on the post-test than they did in the pre-test, and they were also used the Corpus to test their intuitions fairly frequently and did so with a high degree of accuracy as well. So we can see here that for a number of the learners, the training that they had with Corpus had potentially helped boost their production abilities for the passive voice construction. We also gave them the opportunity to use Corpus in free writing practice as well, so not just using experimental procedures. The students would write their reports, or in this case, their essays. This is from a different class group. I would provide some written corrective feedback using yellow highlight for maybe expressions that could reasonably be solved using Corpus consultation. The students then revised their writing based on that feedback and used color coding to indicate what tool they've used. So they had the option of using any tool they liked, that's including Corpus tools and non-Corpus tools. So they could use Google, they could use Google Translate, they could use a dictionary, or they could use Lingual as a Corpus tool, Scale, and so on. And what we found was that in the science reports, students used a range of tools to revise issues with their science report writing, including Google or dictionary.com and so on, Google Translate. But we also found that the students did use Corpus tools quite frequently, in fact, more frequently than they were using the other tools. And we see a high degree of accuracy with the Corpus consultations taken. In particular, students were using the Corpus to correct passive voice constructions quite frequently as compared with Google or dictionary.com, and they did so with a very high degree of accuracy as well. So quite encouraging results there. However, in the follow-up, and this is something that we get often in DDL studies, whereby a well-meaning applied linguist like myself comes into a school context, says, hey, I've got this wonderful tool that's going to solve some of your language problems. And then a few months later, we interview the students, give them a survey. Hey, are you still using Corpus tools? And unfortunately, not many are continuing to do so. Only 4 out of the original group reported that they were still doing them. And they were using lingual primarily for reasons that I'll explain in a moment. You can see here students' reasons for discontinuing Corpus use, mainly revolving around not knowing how to use the tool properly, or going back to their preferred ways of finding linguistic information, for example, in Google. Difficulties understanding concordance results and the complexity of Corpus output is also seen as a big turnoff, and so on. So lots of different reasons here for discontinuing Corpus use. And these are kind of replicated in a lot of DDL studies, not just for younger learners, but also for adults as well, in various settings. So in terms of the interview and survey data that we gave, they had generally quite positive perceptions about using corporate and DDL. They preferred to use the simplest and fastest tools available. They like to make comparisons of different query results, but they like to have this in one place instead of having to click various functions as you have to do with a number of popular Corpus tools, maybe like Sketch Engine, for example, where you'll search for a given term and then you have to click the frequency button and then you have to click the collocation button, and it's a real pain to use. They also liked different forms of information, so not just concordances, but they liked visual comparative charts, they like statistical information, but they also found disciplinary specificity particularly important. So tools like Skell or Lingual don't allow you to limit searches by genre or discipline. The full Sketch Engine tool does allow you to do that, and they still found that is incredibly useful, even though they frequently complained about the complexity of the Sketch Engine platform in general. So based on this feedback, we decided to produce a new purpose-built Corpus tool, and that's introduced to you here, Corpus Mate. So I don't have much time left to go through the main functions, but I will just kind of provide a brief overview. It's got a number of different corpora spanning 50 million words, almost roughly divided between written data and spoken data. This spans 20 different subject areas, including science, history, technology, and when you conduct a search, you can filter for these different topics. One of the things that these are the different corpora that we use. So we have here the simple Wikipedia corpus, British Academic Corpus of Written English, TED Talk corpus, Elsevier Science Text corpus, the British National Corpus of Spoken Data, and the BBC Teach corpus data as well, for just over 50 million words, with a fairly decent range of documents and tokens over the 20 different topic areas within the corpus data. In terms of the search options, we have only 3 operators, so no kind of complex corpus query language, no use of regular expressions and things like that. We wanted to keep it as simple as possible. Students have the option of searching for individual words or phrases. They have the wildcard symbol operated with a star, a question mark, which lets you check for 0 or 1 occurrence of the previous word. So do I need this word in this expression? I can put a question mark on that word and see if I need that or not. And then the or operator, which is operationalized with a slash. So is it in the small or is it as small? And it will give you the information there based on that. One of the really cool things that it does, and which has also been replicated in the latest version of AntConc, is in terms of the concordances themselves, organized not in terms of alphabetical order of the preceding context, which is what you get in most corpus tools. But something that AntConc's done recently and that we've replicated here is to organize the results by the frequency of the 4-gram. So here the most frequent 4-word combination with this search term here, assess, is displayed at the top. But in order to prevent very frequent results dominating the page, we've also developed a tool whereby only one example is given, and then you can click here on the right, and that will open up then the rest of the results. So you can see here that assess the impact of is an incredibly frequent construction in this corpus. And I can then hide that as well and get to the second one here, assess the effect of, and so on. All of these are clickable. It gives some information about the source of the data, the topics that were covered. You can get the citation from Google Scholar, and you can also be taken to Google Translate to see some of the translation of this as well. In particular, seeing the source is something quite advantageous at the moment as we live in the ChatGPT era, where you don't know what the data is that is underlying some of the sentences that you're getting out of that. We can also switch to sentence view. This allows you to see your search terms in a sentence format, and you can expand the context now for the first time of the concordance with adding one sentence before and one sentence after. And you can do this as many as 4 times. So if you really want to see the context that the search term for a given concordance is generated, you can click that expand button and it will give you as much information as possible. The compare results function works similarly to Lingual, whereby you get a visual display of the different lemmas in this case. Or if I want to use a wildcard search, I might then be able to see visually the percentage frequency of a given shot there from that search term. Or the pattern finder tool will give me the most frequent foregrams, but this time in the table form, limited to the top 20 hits together with its count in the corpus. These then are clickable and will take you straight to the concordance. And then we might also want to look at the distribution by topic, looking at the discipline specificity of a given term, for example, assessment. We're still yet to normalize this frequency. That's something that BIT is working on at the moment. So probably a little bit unreliable right now, but by the end of the week, that should all be fixed up nicely. So I think I've pretty much reached the end of the time here. I'm just going to jump ahead to the last few slides. So we're currently using the Corpus Mate platform for language teacher training courses in Vietnam. Teachers are currently building lesson plans using these tools, including Corpus Mate. We're going to publish this in a special issue of Assessing Corpus Literacy for an upcoming special issue of TESOL Quarterly. Not only that, but we've also got here the seminar series, which contain a lot of information about 30 different speakers on all talking about the topic of DDL. You can access this YouTube playlist by following the link that I've just posted here in the chat. Again, there are 30 different talks here with some of the world leading experts in this field, including Lawrence Anthony, Reka Jablonkai, Anne O'Keefe, Hove Larson, and so on. So if you want more information about this topic, about this field, do go ahead and check that out for those of you who are interested.